So to mention one of those that's on sort of the outside of it now, Prince Harry's made headlines again back here in the UK over the weekend, because this is an interesting one, because I thought we had moved past this with the so-called peace summit that we had between Harry's communications team and the King's communications team a little bit earlier this year. But, he raised eyebrows, Harry raised eyebrows the day that Prince William landed in Rio for the Earthshot Prize, because it was the same time that he announced he'd be going to Canada, which again just shows that scheduling clash, which we understand had created some tension in the past. So what's happened over the weekend is that the palace sources have told The Times that they had never received any notice, despite Harry's team saying at the time that they had let them know as a courtesy that news was coming. This seems to be a case of recollections may vary once again. And I thought this was in the rearview mirror. So what do we think's going on here?
I mean, you either did it or they didn't. So if the palace is saying they had no notification, then I don't see why they would say that if they had been notified. I never really understand what all this stuff fuss is about anyway, because Harry is on the outside. If he can't necessarily organise his diary just to suit the royal families, no more than when you're trying to do the grid system, other members of the royal family can absolutely fit in. Does it really matter? I think it's more of a puff than anything else. I don't think it really mattered. I don't think people were overly concerned. William got the lion's share of the coverage. Harry didn't really get a lot of coverage, I didn't think, which is inevitable, really.
I suppose that was the ultimate test, was to see then what would happen with the coverage, and I guess no harm, no foul.
I mean, there were 30, 40 journalists covering, William. I don't think there was less than a handful dealing with Harry. So I don't think that it really mattered.
And doesn't it just illustrate, I think, the very different directions that both of those brothers are going? I mean, it was Harry who famously said all those years back that they were on a different path, and never more have they appeared on totally different trajectories. And, I think I look at Harry and I see someone in the vein of absolute celebrity. Whether it's award ceremonies,
after the Kardashians party.
Yeah. The Kardashians.
Delete the pictures.
essentially in celebrity territory. As Rob says, William doing really important work over in Brazil, standing in for his father, addressing COP30, big pack of journalists following everything he's doing. I mean, this is a future king in the making. Harry feels very much like an afterthought.
Yeah, and also those photographs, or at least of William on the plane with in shirt sleeves going through his briefing notes. I just thought there was a touch of the sort of JFK's about it. There was like a new Camelot, really. I just thought that you got a sense that he's stepping up. Yes, I'm not saying that he's treading on his father's shoes, not far from it, but he's definitely embracing and evolving into that role.
And they seem very much in lockstep as well. Those days of rivalry and competition, and there were days of that between Charles and William. I think in many ways the traumas and the scandals that have surrounded the family in recent years have actually solidified these two. They are very much on the same page. They are absolutely aligned.
I think that to a degree, I don't think they are absolutely aligned. I think the king will probably, like any king, he is the number one, and I think that he's got his own ideas. William has been very vocal in some of those ideas that he would do when it comes to his time, and maybe he should probably be a little less vocal on that, because the king, out of respect, is still in position.
Well, I want to get into all of this because you do discuss this in your book. It covers so many major royal flashpoints. We don't have time to talk about all of them, unfortunately, but it is such an interesting read. So your new book, The Windsor Legacy, A Royal Dynasty of Secrets, Scandal and Survival, is out now. So you've covered the royals for so many decades, but in your time researching and speaking to people for this book, what was the biggest shock or surprise for you that you've uncovered?
Well, finally, it was just one particular story. I mean, the actual book covers 100 years since the Queen's birth, and I thought it was a good position, because next year issue would have been 100, late Queen Elizabeth. But obviously, the major scandals over the years have been huge. But there was one story that jumped out at me, which, as a journalist, I thought was amazing, was that the Queen Camilla, when she was the Duchess of Cornwall, her staff were taking her jewels to Bryce Norton for a trip to Canada. And they stopped off for a coffee. Two of them went for a coffee. The other one, who was supposed to stay by the car, went off and had a cigarette, leaving the jewellery in the car. And can you imagine this happening? I mean, And then in that time, there was a gang operating in that area, and they stole the jewellery bag. It's like a scene out of the Keystone Cops. And then,
Wow.
can you imagine going back to the car and then all the three of them looking at each other saying, what's happened to the jewels?
Someone's getting fired.
So they had to obviously make a call. And then they didn't bring in the police. They brought in intelligence services, and they tracked the gang, and a deal was done where the jewels were returned and nobody was charged. So it was actually that story. I was sort of open-mouthed that sort of thing could happen today. But really, I think...
Did anyone lose their job?
No, they didn't. Funny enough, and I know the three names of the people that were in the were there. I don't suppose they'll be stopping off for coffee anytime soon. But there was a number of bigger issues. I think that there was a recurring theme of the problem of the spare. That did seem to come through. You know, from the moment when you've got the issue of obviously the biggest thing that's hit the royal family in 100 years has been the abdication crisis. Much bigger than anything else. I think Mencken described it as the biggest story since the birth of Christ. So, you know, it was at the time when it was being written about, you know, when things were being blocked. So the abdication crisis, obviously, you know, and how the spare had to step up, i.e. somebody, George VI, who was not prepared for the role, all the way through, you know, from Princess Margaret and her problems with Townsend and the issues that arose there, and the fact that she couldn't marry the man that she loved, all the way through to, you know, Andrew and now Harry. There seems to be a recurring problem that they hopefully will try to resolve before George and Charlotte are too much older.
I think there surely have been some key lessons learned in the last 5 or 6 years, maybe, you'd hope. So you delve into the relationship, as we mentioned before, between William and the King. So a lot of people are interested in this because it does feel like it's the two of them now against, you know, there's a very, very small group of senior royals. So are they close, or what's that dynamic like?
No, Katie's right. Of course, they've realised in the last 18 months or so that they have to be, if you like, singing from the same hymn sheet. But that doesn't mean they necessarily have been close over the years. I mean, there's no doubt that Harry was very much more in tune with Charles, and Charles used to get on better with him. And sometimes William can be a little difficult. But there were issues over whether or not he should fly the helicopter with his family in it, and that led to rows between not only the late Queen but with Charles, saying you just can't do this. But he continues to do it. Issues over the Royal Collection, Ivory Collection and the Royal Collection. All sort of areas, you know, he doesn't want to wear a kilt, things like this. All of these things, little tiny things that any friction may happen in any family. But I think essentially they realise that they may not necessarily have the same vision going forward, but the King, you know, at 77 realises that his time, whatever it is going to be, you know, he's not going to have a long reign. And that it's really the future is William's more than anything else. And I think in that respect, there's sort of a sense of, you know, passing on the baton, even if, you know, I think the King probably feels, from what I understand, that it's good to appeal to new people that don't necessarily support the institution, but don't forget the people that do support the institution and the traditions and the way things are done. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's all good appealing to a new electorate, if you like, but at the same time remember the ones that are why the people like the royal family as it is. Very
delicate balancing act. And on Harry's relationship with the King, you write about that as well, and you had a very interesting new insight into about what actually happened during his very brief meeting with the King early last year, right after that cancer diagnosis was made public. You've written that the King may have told him a little white lie.
Well, it wasn't, I mean, I don't suppose you could say it was a white lie, really, because I wouldn't necessarily want to accuse the King of that. But the fact is, what happened was the King had telephoned Harry, and Harry had taken it upon himself to come over to Britain, which I think most children would think is fair, and you can understand his desire to do so. But at that time, I think the King was quite tired. He had just been given the diagnosis, was on quite a new, you know, regime of treatment. And I think he arranged. I know that what happened when they agreed to see his son, but didn't want to, you know, after the initial meeting go on and on, you know, because he was quite tired. He wanted to go back to St Sandringham, and he arranged for somebody to come in and say there was a procedure that the King had to have. He didn't actually have to have a procedure. He had to get on a helicopter to go to Sandringham, but it meant that the meeting was cut down. And so if it had strayed into areas that were pretty wary, at that time, I don't think the king was particularly keen to be discussing money, the problems with his brother, other issues. It could just be a meeting to say, you know, the father and son to get together.
And of course, in fairness, exactly as you said, the king had a lot on his plate at that time.
He just wanted a rest, I think.
Yes. And lastly on that, what about William and Harry? There's been so much made of Harry's attempts to reconnect with the UK in a number of ways this year, particularly with his dad. But what about William? What does their relationship look like 5, 10 years from now? Is there a reunion?
I personally don't see it, but I mean, well, one can live in hope. I think that one thing that we've seen through history, we saw with George VI and his brother when, you know, after Edward VIII had said that he was quitting, was abdicating, but he swears his allegiance to his brother. We saw that he didn't really, and he nicked millions of pounds effectively from the royal coffers, and that really did cause a friction between the two brothers that never ever healed. And I think that the problem we've got with William and Harry is not only distance, because it's very hard to build a new rebuild a relationship when one's so far away, and then the visits are so intermittent. I don't see there really being any common ground at the moment. But it would be a shame for William going forward if his reign, you know, through the media and everything was defined by this relationship breakdown with his brother. In that respect, it may be better for them to try to find some sort of common ground, but I don't really see it myself.